Nice to see you again. This is Chemical X. I'm Internet Space. It's about that time to talk about Star Wars. So I went to see the movie Thursday night, really bled into Friday morning. And what I did is I recorded a review literally about 30 minutes after seeing the movie, right? And I was kind of rambling. I was kind of all over the place. I uploaded it here. But I'm going to get ahead of that upload and kind of post something after being able to collect my thoughts a little bit better so that this thing is a little bit more streamlined. That other video was 50 minutes of me talking kind of all over the place. But I wanted to talk to you guys about Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. I want to start this video out. I want to start this review out by saying that I'm not going to say anything that has anything to do with a spoiler for the first part of my review. Okay? But in the second part of my review, I will get into details that you're not going to want to know from me. You're going to want to see from the movie. So I will let you know when that stuff comes up so that, you can easily just go ahead and switch off. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and say how I feel about the film up front. Okay, I think that it has the potential to be a great movie, but it's marred by its attempt to or its requirement to fix the movie that came before it, The Last Jedi. So I believe that Episode 9, in its own little way, instead of being the third installment of a trilogy, it feels more like a reboot that happens right at the end of a trilogy. It feels like something that's trying to fix everything that will come after it. It feels like a movie that's attempting to fix what came before it, that feels obligated to pander to fans. And I say pander, and I don't know if I mean that in a bad way. It's your own interpretation of if that will be bad. But no, is it a bad movie? No, I don't think that J.J. Abrams is the kind of guy who can make a bad movie. I think that he's so good at passable. He's so good at being able to tug on the positive emotions that he wants you to feel from a movie that it's hard for him to make a bad movie. I think that its flaws really have more to do with the universe it lives in rather than actual issues that the movie have. And I will get into that. I will get into what the issues are, but I first want to talk about what I liked about the movie because I really don't want to sound like I'm ragging on this movie, but once we get to kind of the bad part, we probably will live there a little bit, right? Because that's the most polarizing part of the conversation about this film. So some of the notes that I put about kind of what I think the movie gets right. First of all, it continues to develop the relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey. And I mean, that to me is the most special part of this particular trilogy. Their dynamic, Kylo Ren's abilities, Rey's abilities, and both of them kind of struggling with the dark side is something that's established even before you see this film. So I'm not giving away anything by saying that. You will continue to see that challenge take place, and I think that it's so well handled. And uh, I think that Ryan Johnson did some interesting things. I think that some things, when you kind of give somebody canonized material, but you allow them to kind of take their own liberties with it, I am on record as saying that that is not the worst thing in the world, but I think that you have to set it up well. And I think one of the best things that Ryan Johnson set up is this ability for Rey and Kylo Ren to be able to kind of be in the same room, to the Force being able to kind of converge their physical locations. It is a really awesome concept and it's done extremely well in this film. I'll get into a little bit more of how well that's done in the spoiler parts of my review, where people who are just coming from the theater can be able to get an idea for what it is that I'm talking about here. Another thing that it does well, it's in almost a I wouldn't actually, compare this movie to Twilight, but it almost feels like a love triangle between Kylo Ren, Rey, and Finn. And it's like I said, I probably shouldn't even invoke Twilight, but it's funny because I wouldn't be surprised if teen girls and maybe even boys these days will have a team Kylo or a team uh, uh, or a Team Finn out of this situation. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm trying to drop any jewels about something that happens in this film, just that we already know that Kylo and Rey's relationship unspokenly uh, seems to be one of a possible king and queenship. We know that Kylo Ren extends his hand to Rey in um, in The Last Jedi. And it's implied that it will be to rule together, king and queen. So there's that implication there. There's more done with that in this film. And one of the kind of things that I feel that J.J. Abrams kind of took back from Rian Johnson is I think that he wanted there to be some kind of feeling of a romance between Rey and Finn. But what's beautiful about it is that Finn's character, his his courage is learned from and is motivated by Rey. In the first film, you don't get a feeling, you don't get that harsh ideological feeling of it being shoved down your throat that the woman is the stronger character. You get this real feeling that Finn, being someone who was pulled into the order against his will and who seems to naturally just be a good person and is not someone who may naturally have the courage to do the things asked of him in the order, but does have the courage to know that it wasn't right and that he couldn't be a part of it, did have the courage to flee. But fleeing is something that we see from him so often that what you find is that in order for this character to sometimes be at his most courageous moments, it is driven by a love of Rey. And we kind of come back to that in this film. And I think that is so well done. So you kind of have that dynamic of kind of wanting Finn to get his chance to tell Rey how he feels and things of that nature, but then also being so wrapped up in the relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey. And it's all so well done. I think it's probably the best parts of the movie. Um, Also, I think the fight sequences are really, really well done. I think this is a visually stunning film. I think all three of them have been. This is no different. I love seeing the actual visual ways that you get to see the Force work. It's something that these movies have done that really didn't exist in a cinematic form before. Just when I talk about kind of that vibration, that tension that the Force seems to have when used in these films in this kind of new era of the Disney era of Star Wars. It's really amazing. I mean, and there were people who kind of stopped and slowed down the fight that Rey had with Kylo Ren against kind of the Red Army, whoever those people were, when they had that battle with Snoke. Um, and it looks like in this film, I mean, like she really did a good job of just being on her cues and her choreography for her fights. So everything felt tighter. A lot of things were really well done. Um, and essentially, this movie is only disappointing because it cannot live on its own. Um, because to me, those are the things that the movie does really, really well without dropping any spoilers. I think that if you like these characters, it kind of returns back to the characters that you really like, and the character that is added in is really moving along with the story. You don't feel like the added in character kind of takes the story away from where your focus wants to be, like people felt with Rose, where they go off on an expedition that's really, really important to the mission, but what ends up happening has nothing to do with the mission, and it ends up feeling more like a PSA for animal rights activists or something of that nature. It feels more like Rose's thing than being in the story, and I think that turned people off to the character. And also, she kind of shoehorned herself in between the Rey Finn thing that we all wanted. And as I said before, we kind of get back. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's done well with this film. But let's get into what's not done well without talking about spoilers, and then from there we're going to go into spoilers, and I will announce exactly when that is, so that you guys know. But so far, still no spoilers, guys. So with that being said, what I do not like about this film, and I've already mentioned it, this film this film is marred by a base of fans that really hated it, and even having some casual fans that hated it. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that ideology is pouring into everything that we watch, and it's pretty much everybody notices it. Some people are just for it, so their interpretation of it, or how it affects them, is different. But we all know that the ideology that is being constantly pushed to us is a leftist ideology, right? So everything has to be extremely diverse, and the thing is, it's like, why would that be bad, right? And I think what's funny is that these kind of things, I do think, happen naturally. I do think that in a lot of ways we're in an era of cinema where just naturally you have generations of white people, black people growing up together, and it being more common for a theater to be full of white people to see a film that the lead is black, or a film can have a large draw of men, but the main character be a woman, like Rey with Star Wars, and without kind of shoving it down your throat. What people didn't like, I believe, about the Rian Johnson film, and honestly, when I was watching the movie, I didn't have a major issue with it, although it was kind of silly, is that you have this character who is a woman with purple hair. It almost as if she seems to, the way that fans take it, be like the literal embodiment of feminism, just placed in the middle of Star Wars to kind of affect the story, and kind of try to tell you an ideological lesson. And when that's done, I think people notice that these days. And the thing is that it's not even, it doesn't even take you to be like extremely smart to notice it. It's just so obvious. So I think that when you take a character like Rey and you give her, and she's just a character made to be special, I think that it's sad that we had to call her a Mary Sue and things of that nature, when there's other characters that have represented hope. So they are extremely good at everything, but we didn't care, and it's because they were men. And I mean, I'm just being honest about that. I'm not somebody that you would call a apologist for woke culture. I just talked about this on the Watchmen video, but I do think that sometimes, sometimes we charge things with being something that they aren't. And I don't think that, even though it may have been an actual decision to make sure that the main character of these films was Rey, and that so that it could be a female, that's fine. I think that they did the right things with the character to make me follow along with that. That character could be a male. It could have been a alien from another planet in the Star Wars canon. Honestly, because what makes you relate to the character is her having a humble beginning and being special, and kind of being found and placed in the middle of a fantastic story, the same way that kind of Luke Skywalker is, or the same way that Anakin Skywalker is. Really, is the origin of that, I guess, in Star Wars lore. So when it's all said and done, I think that there's a lot for us to take on in the Star Wars universe to be able to make us say, okay, she could do that, she could do that, and she could do this, because we've seen other characters that just happen to be male characters do it. I mean, she's just a female Anakin in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I mean, just with that being said, I really don't want to continue to go on that too long, but what Rian Johnson did, because he injected that ideology in, that I don't think that JJ was really trying to establish with a character like Rey, I don't think may have been like one. I don't think it was. I truly don't think it was something that was a point for this series to want to make. I think that it was just a part of the decision making of Rian Johnson. And this movie has to kind of undo so many of his decisions that it struggles to be its own film. And that to me is what's holding it back. It really wants to answer for us a lot of things that weren't answered in the second film. And because of that, it's just kind of off, because really what you should have in the second film, if we were going to learn things about Rey's origin, Snoke's origin, things of that nature, we should have learned that in the second film. That's why there was such an excitement for it. Rian Johnson subverted expectations. I think that you can do that positively, but I think that from a storytelling standpoint, from a there needs to be a third movie standpoint, I think that he really kind of took the wheels off of the bus. And at the end of the day, you have a movie that instead of being able to just tell its own story, has to go back and tell, okay, you need to care about this. You have 2.5 hours to really care about this being a thing when we should be seeing the payoff. We should be seeing the results of things that characters have learned by this film, not learning it and getting the wrap up. It almost feels like they would have been better off just trying to pretend that episode 8 was a dream and that episode 9 is episode 8 and that we still had another movie left, honestly. So in that sense, it's just disappointing, and it's kind of sad that you had to do so much fanfare, you had to do so much damage control that this movie couldn't live in its own world because it's part of it that are great enough, it's parts of it that are good enough that it could have been that. So at the end of the day, like I said, is it a bad movie? No. I don't think that, like I said, I don't think, and I'll talk about kind of the negatives of that. I don't think that J.J. Abrams is capable of making a bad film. I think he's good enough at almost everything to make it better. But what he's great at is really kind of tying you up emotionally and kind of hopeful and good feeling emotions and kind of carrying you through that, so that that emotional ride at the end makes you feel like, okay, I just watched a good movie. Um, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about this in depth. Let's get into some spoilers and let's stay on kind of what doesn't work. Because as I speak about this, I'll also kind of throw in some of the things that will work. So this is the more in-depth conversation right here. This is going to include spoilers. If it wasn't enough for me to just tell you, I would recommend it. So let me say that I would recommend it. Go ahead and go see it. I don't think it's as bad as some people will say. I don't think it's as good as some people will say, but I think it's good enough that you'll be entertained. If you're a big time Star Wars fan, you liking this film is going to have more to do with if the things that are attempted to be corrected, they land for you right. And I think they may not land, but you may still like it. So I think the ride really depends on how casual of a fan you are. But in the end of the day, it's definitely not anything that's worth boycotting or just kind of throwing away as a mess or trash. I really don't think it's that bad. With that being said, though, let's talk about some spoilers with it. I mean, here's what we have to get into. I mean, I noted that there were 5 things, technically 4, but 5 things that this movie kind of had to do because of the position it was put in, and none of them land properly because it is obvious damage control. So let's go ahead and get into it. When this movie opens, we see that Rey is training. Okay, so it is going to be 5 things because I'm going to kind of move this around kind of off the top of my head. I'm going to go away from my notes. I'm not going to say it's 4, possibly. I'm not going to say it's 5, technically 4. I'm going to say it's 5 things that that J.J. Abrams has to do to undo Episode 8, but it's so obvious that it falls flat. Number one is the movie opens on Rey being trained by Princess Leia. Okay, and it falls flat because you feel when you see it, the way that you see it, the way that it happens in the film, you don't get to spend enough time with what's going on there to the point that like it feels like it's there to fix the fact that we have Rey going to train with Luke Skywalker, a moment that had people really on the edge of their seats, not being able to wait for what happens when we get the opening of Episode 8. And Rian Johnson kind of, throws it in everyone's face by, we flip the lightsaber right over our back. Luke Skywalker does. Everything that's kind of happening on that island is really ridiculous. You don't really get to see Luke really train Rey, so you don't get a feeling that she could have become an exponentially better Jedi with her training that she got from Luke, because he didn't much train her, and he wasn't the Luke that people wish that we would be. But that's going to be its own thing, so I won't talk about that too much. But because of that, just in the sense of being able to believe that Rey can do all the things that we will see her do in this film, we need her to get proper training, and Leia is kind of shoehorned into that position, which you're going to hear me say shoehorn a lot because there's a lot of things in this film that just they're making it fit to tell the story that they want to tell, but it should have been done in the previous film, so they don't have to do it, and this could just be its own thing. That is pretty much just the whole issue with this thing. It is attempting to reboot mistakes while be a movie, and while be a part of the trilogy that it's trying to reboot. It's just weird in that sense. So with that being said, we just don't spend enough time with that relationship of Rey and Leia and what's going on. We see that like Rey has certain books that are obviously Jedi books, but Luke burnt the books, so you don't know, did she take these books? Are these Leia's books? Kind of where is she getting this information from? So you kind of just have to know that that is your way of being able to that is their way of being able to tell you that all the crazy things that Rey is going to do with the Force, the fact that she's going to be just as good as Kylo Ren and already has been just such a opponent of his, we're going to learn why all these things are, but the payoff is not great. So I just feel like when it happens, everything is happening so quickly in the beginning. We're going from scene to scene to scene to thing to thing to thing, and it's kind of all like, okay, let's throw back the crew together that we like, that everybody loved, so that everybody can get the movie that they want. And the way that Rey is kind of pulled out of training, Poe, Finn, C-3PO, BB-8 all end up on this adventure. It all feels like J.J. Abrams really was wanting to go a different way, but knowing that the call to do it a certain way just kind of forced, like, okay, never mind. We can't spend too much time on that. We can't spend too much time on that. Let's hurry up, put these guys together, and let's get on the journey. That's how it kind of feels. And like, even when you have a moment where they're kind of running from troopers on this in the sandstorms, as soon as that's over, they kind of fall into a cave, and it's kind of another thing. So it just feels like you're constantly bouncing from one thing to the next. The pacing is just off, and it's because in the beginning, it's just, it has to be exposition the movie to get you to where they want to get you to. That's the number one thing that's kind of that's marred by trying to fix other things. The second thing is the identity of Snoke is another thing that's kind of just shoehorned into this movie to fix what Rian Johnson decided to do by never telling us who Snoke is, never getting an understanding of what's going on there. So of course, what is Snoke? Snoke is just some character that was created by Palpatine to control and put things in little Ben Solo's head to kind of turn him into Kylo Ren and make him the new Darth Vader, is what we end up learning. And we see a we kind of learn that, you know, Palpatine has all this kind of dark magic. Well, I mean, it's not like we don't know that in a sense, but what we kind of is implied is that Palpatine has always been around because the dark side of the Force can pretty much allow him to animate his dead body, because he is pretty much an animated dead body. He's technically a zombie in the beginning of this film, and we are led to believe that, you know, cloning. Well, I mean, cloning we know is a part of it, but it almost looks like Snoke is something that's grown in a lab, and that there's like a bunch of them there. So it's kind of like his physical form was a puppet in a way, is what they're kind of telling us. And it's just kind of like, you know, it's they had to. And the thing is, you're kind of just like, I know, I mean, for me personally, just like, okay, damn, like you almost wish that they would just own some of that stuff and find a better way to do that. And I think that's why it lands flat. Third is, as I said before, spoilers. So I mean, whatever, man. Like, but Princess Leia, of course, dies because in real life, Carrie Fisher died, and that's one of those things where, like, when I say that you get a feeling that we're getting the Leia training Rey thing as something that has to be done because what we're going to see her do has to feel realistic. It's like Carrie Fisher, they didn't even have her for a lot of her shots, so a lot of it is CGI. And when she dies, it's kind of just like she randomly walks away from everything that's happening, and we're told kind of through exposition, she has to try to reach Ben. Nobody that she's around at the base camp would even know that Ben and Ray are fighting at that particular time, but in the movie, in real time, they are. The scene from the trailer where they're fighting around water is happening, and Princess Leia kind of just walks away from the camp, and almost looks like a shot that they had from before she passed away, that they had to kind of use as like the she's walking away to go say something to Kylo, and it's going to use all of her power, all of her force, and she's going to die. And that's what happens. It's kind of like, and all she says to Kylo is Ben, and he drops his lightsaber and becomes good again. And Rey stabs him, but then fixes his wound with her new force powers, which I said, in order for you to believe that she has these force abilities, you have to believe that she's had like some A1 training from Leia, which is kind of shoehorned into the movie. So the death of Princess Leia is just, they had, it's kind of like her death was so sudden, and it's not her fault, obviously. I'm not going to disrespect the dead. They had nothing else to do with that but use it as Kylo Ren's motivation to turn good, and it just doesn't feel like that was his trajectory at the time. It doesn't feel like he was anywhere near becoming good when he decides to, because Leia died. So it happens. The fourth thing is the return of all these characters that we know and love happens in ways that it's just such obvious fanfare that after the second film in this series, I should say, but technically in all of them, you're talking about the eighth, episode 8. Episode 8 does so much to change those, to move away from the nostalgia and try to tell its own story. I think that's what Rian Johnson wanted to do, is say, we don't have to tie everything to someone in this universe already. Let's make Rey be just somebody who came out of nowhere like Anakin was. Why can't she just be a chosen one? Why does she have to be a Skywalker? Why does she have to be anybody connected to anything? I think was his motivation. Because of that, you have JJ come in and kind of give us some of those same kind of last the Force Awakens tropes, where we see Lando Calrissian pops up in the story, and it's just kind of like, and you also feel like that's affected by the Solo story, with people wanting Lando to just be Lando, or whatever it may be. So it's kind of like, okay, Lando shows up, and like in the theater that it was kind of like no excitement about it, and like there's probably theaters where they'll be clapping for that, and fine. But in mine, I think most people felt like me, like, oh, they're just doing this to try to win people back. And you see Han Solo again coming to Kylo in a vision, and that one is better, but it's still like, this is just to win me back. It's kind of like when an ex who never bought you flowers just does it. You're kind of just like, you were trying to think of some way to get, that's what women are going to be thinking as a man. If a woman buys you something that never did, no matter which way on side of it you're on, you're going to be like, is this genuine or not? That's how it feels. It's like, is this genuine? Are you trying to buy me? That's how it kind of feels. And when Luke comes back, it is directly related to trying to undo episode 8, where Rey is at a point where she is so afraid of her dark side, the dark side in her, and the visions that she has. She says that she's had visions of herself on the Sith throne with Kylo Ren. And she sees the bad side of her abilities, because we have this awesome scene where her and Kylo Ren are fighting to control this First Order vehicle that's attempting to take off, that they think Chewie is on. And in her struggle with Kylo Ren to use the Force powers to bring the ship down, and Kylo Ren is trying to let the ship go, lightning bolts come from out of her hands. The Sith Emperor Palpatine lightning bolts, and she explodes the ship. And so we see this like actual depiction of like dark side abilities coming out of a Jedi, and it's cool and everything of that nature. And so you buy this whole like, she's gonna go back to the island that Luke is on. She wants to just stay there because she feels like at this point, okay, the power of the Force, the Jedi power is too powerful. And Luke pops up to tell her, hey, all that stuff that I was saying, I didn't mean any of that. And you're like, yeah, like you just wish that he was kind of this guy in the last movie. And he catches her lightsaber when she's about to throw that into fire, and he's like, that's no way you you treat a Jedi weapon with respect. And that's just one of those things to kind of undo something that happened before. And some people are going to love that. I'm kind of like, okay, I'd rather just live with that. I'd rather you live with the fact that that happened and not just like try to do an actual physical remake of that situation and kind of turn it on his head. Like, but see, this goes to the bad J.J. Abrams, the guy who he knows how to do things well, but sometimes he doesn't know how to land things with the gravitas to make you feel them. And I think because, to do that, you kind of have to have balls. Ryan Johnson made a lot of mistakes, but he had the balls to try to change, to try to do something completely different. And the thing is, like, we're kind of in the era where because of the internet, it's hard to. People kind of want to see the story that they're used to, and in some cases, they're right. In this way, I explain. I would compare what Ryan Johnson did to what Zack Snyder did. Look, Superman is not meant to be brooding for a reason. Superman is overpowered because he's meant to represent hope. He's meant to be impossibly strong so that only the best out of the best out of the best of us would be able to relate to what Superman is as a superhero, because it's about the hope that we can be that kind of hero. So he being a representation of hope kind of makes you overpowered in general, because it's about the idea that no matter how bad everything is going, you can still persevere. It's religious in a sense. It's about faith, things of that nature. Those are those are themes that if you remove them from a character, you cannot build this story that people who are into this thing can really believe in. So Luke Skywalker, like Superman, is kind of a hopelessly hopeful character. Of course, he's allowed to go through struggles. He's allowed to have times where he doesn't succeed. He's allowed to have to fight through something. But and he's allowed to have times where he's down. And I think that's one of the things that Ryan Johnson wasn't like extremely wrong about. It's okay for Luke to go through an arc where he doesn't believe in the Force anymore, and that's not what you have to be mad about. You have to, but you want that character to have some kind of payoff, or some kind of return back to that hopefulness, which we do kind of get in that movie. But when we see Luke in this movie, it's for the purpose of kind of undoing what's been done before. It isn't just a continuation of Luke's arc towards, okay, it was silly for me to ever get that way. And he kind of gives her that speech, and that's kind of all we really would have needed. But still, like his place in the movie, I think, is still positive and everything. But it's just kind of like, what I mean is that emotionally, this stuff doesn't land the way that you want it to, because you know that it's pandering. Finally, number five, the thing this movie has to undo, that takes away from it in itself, is Rey's bloodline. So the biggest thing that anyone could spoil about this movie is that Rey is a Palpatine. And the thing about it is that, again, we have a moment where instead of just owning whatever happened before, we have to undo it. So instead of owning it, where maybe everybody's shocked to find out that she's a Palpatine, what we find is that Luke knew she was a Palpatine, Leia knew she was a Palpatine, Palpatine knew she was a Palpatine. Nobody tells us though. And Kylo Ren says to her, well, it's not, I never lied to you. It's not that your parents were nobodies. It's not that that's not true. It's that they chose to be nobodies because they didn't want to be they didn't want to be a part of the Palpatine evil empire. They fled with Rey in order to protect her from being under, his wing and continuing the evil nature of the of where he obviously would be taking the family. So they sold her to slavery to keep Palpatine from being able to find him. And then they were killed for that, or find her, and then they were killed for that. And it's kind of like, I wish we could have got there in some kind of way that felt like a surprise instead of a way that felt like, hey, like when we said like your parents are nobodies, like, well, yeah, technically they were, but it was because they wanted to be. No, like let them go ahead and be nobodies because maybe Palpatine is such an evil guy that like if you go back to folklore of history, kind of gods and stuff like that, right? Like, you would have the fathers of demigods like Hercules, things of that nature, where Zeus wants nothing to do with most of his children. How about that? So why not Palpatine be a guy that kills all of his sons so that nobody can ever challenge him because he doesn't want them to be born with his natural abilities, and this one son escapes and nobody knew that he was Palpatine's son. Like, why not it be that way? Where when we find it out, it's kind of like, oh, everybody shot. Palpatine didn't know all of this stuff. Why make it why do it this way? If it happened like that in the second movie, by this third movie, the things that happen at the end of it have a payoff, and you're like, boom, whatever. But it would be like learning that you wouldn't want to learn that Darth Vader is Luke's father in the final movie of that trilogy, because it changes what that final movie is able to be, which a lot of people don't like. And for that reason, the second movie is such a classic. But at the same time, it's kind of like a rushed ending because we all know it is the end, and it's like it has to be delivered then. We expected it to be delivered in the second movie. I mean, like in formulaic, I mean, from a standpoint of formula, you could have done that. This movie could have lived on its own and then be great for how it ended on its own. So those are the five things that are kind of marred by trying to fix episode 8, which kind of bring this movie down. Even with all that said, it's not the worst movie ever. Again, it's not a bad movie. It's just a disappointing movie. If you are emotionally attached to it, you could be disappointed. You can end up finding yourself liking some of the things that they did. You can end up finding yourself liking that they tried to fix issues, but you're going to feel like, okay, I just went to see a movie that was trying to fix issues rather than seeing a good movie. And I think this kind of brings up my last point on this, is that sometimes you cause these overreactions with how fans act on the internet these days. I think that it kind of gives itself to overreaction because we have the ability to kind of bombard and say we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this, and then you get something that's worse than what you got before because it's less original and it's pandering 100%. So like Batman versus Superman was so divisive, but I think it was an original piece of art and it has a place in DC lore and cinema. What we got in the Justice League is a trash movie. I mean, like, it's not horrible, but it's a trash movie. It is overcorrecting. And I think that in Star Wars, the only issue that I have with it is the overcorrecting. I would have rather them just accept it what it was that they did, remove some of the more obvious mistakes. Like the biggest mistake that's fixed is the characters that we love being brought back to the forefront of the movie. Kylo Ren, Rey, Finn, Poe. Boom. That was a fix of enough. Them being focused on doing one thing, not this mission, that mission. Although it feels like that's what was going to happen, and they kind of fixed it and streamlined it to that. Like, you could tell that was a fix. If that was a more natural thing that the story was written to do, and we just went down that path, all of this comes out way better in the end. So with that being said, I mean, like, in some ways, as I even talk about it, I become more and more on the fence. But I'll just say again, not a bad movie, marked with some mistakes. I would recommend seeing it because it's a good chance that you will like it when it's all said and done. And if you don't like it, um, it'll probably be your fault that you don't like it because it was trying to fix things that you didn't like. So that's what's funny about it. I may have missed some things, but I think I pretty much hit the nail on the head. I'm going to be coming right back after this one with another video because I want to talk about kind of the politics of Star Wars to kind of answer something that's been asked or brought up, and have a little bit of a discussion about it. So thanks for watching this one. I hope you guys find it helpful, and yeah, please do like, subscribe, all that good stuff. This is just the beginning for us. As you guys know, we've been doing this for a while, and we're back at it. So peace, love, hair grease. I'm out.